Outdoor Genetics
podcast. It's just a clip.
Well, we did have a few questions left behind on the last podcast, and part of that is my fault because it's easy for me to kind of get off on tangents and stuff. But let's go ahead and get some of these questions out of the way, and then we can kind of rock it on past that. But so one of the questions that was brought into us from Dustin, he asked, how do you choose the right broadhead for the job? So, I mean, I know there's a lot of different broadheads to choose from and things to consider, but what would be your opinion? What would be your take on picking the absolute best broadhead?
That is the million-dollar question. That's a lot of my content on social media is really broadhead based, and the reason why is because I believe it is the most important piece of equipment you will choose, because it is what does the killing. It is what is the lethal part of your entire setup. With that said, I think there's a lot of stock going around, or however you want to phrase it, in that there's only one good selection, or even that there is a best broadhead. And I don't believe that. Right. So the way I go about choosing a broadhead or recommending a broadhead, the first thing I have to know, if somebody asks, hey, what's the best broadhead, or what broadhead's best for me, I have to know what bow you're shooting, because that gives me an idea of speed. I need to know your draw length and draw weight on that bow, again, so I have an idea of speed. I need to know the arrow you're shooting, and that's going to be the brand and the spine, and then using that I can find the arrow weight, or if you can give me a total arrow weight. And then I can use those to get a rough figure of the amount of momentum you're pushing, and that allows me to best recommend a broadhead. Now, after I get that, another thing is, what animals you're pursuing. Because if you're a guy shooting elk, I'm going to recommend a much different broadhead than if you're a guy shooting whitetail in Florida. The game you're pursuing plays a huge factor as well. So, and I'll just throw out some random kind of figures to give you an idea of my process. So if somebody gets a hold of me and they say, hey, I shoot 28 inches at 70 pounds, and I'm shooting a V3X, and it's a 410 grain arrow, and say they know the speed. We'll say it's 293 feet a second. So immediately for me, I'm going to want to see a heavier arrow than that. I don't like to go anything less than 450 grains for somebody with those kind of stats.
Sure.
Because you're still going to get really good speed, you're still going to get really good trajectory, you're still going to get all of the good things, because that's what I see a lot of people that are worried about speed, is they're worried about the trajectory of the arrow and misjudging yardage. But you're still going to get all those things, but you're going to get more momentum, which is really paramount. So for a guy like that, and we'll say he gives me all that stuff and he says he's shooting deer in Florida. Well, Florida deer, a big buck is like 120, 140 pounds. I'm going to tell you to pick whatever you want. Put you a big cut mechanical up there, a fixed blade, whatever you want's going to work fine. Now, say you tell me you're hunting Canadian moose. Well, anything big boned like that is immediately going to get rid of mechanicals for me, because they just really aren't durable enough, in my opinion, to be doing big boned animals. And even elk, I would not ever shoot a mechanical at elk. Now, I have to preface all these things for people, because inevitably somebody always says, well, my buddy's killed 10 elk with a Rage 2-inch hypodermic, and that's great. But when I recommend a broadhead, I'm also trying to recommend something that I feel is going to give you the highest chance of success. And when you're talking big boned animals, I really feel like mechanicals fall off extremely hard. So selecting a broadhead for somebody that has stats like that is really easy, or recommending a broadhead is really easy, because their options are unlimited. I mean, a guy like that could shoot basically any fixed blade they want at an elk and be successful. And there's not, another thing that's really paramount to all of this is there are very few broadheads that I would say are bad broadheads that won't do what you need them to do. And I think that's another place people are falling short, is they think there's a such thing as good and bad broadheads. And I've tested a lot at this point, and I've ran across very few what I would consider bad broadheads. There are some that aren't as good as others, but there are very few bad. And more than that, there's a whole lot of good broadheads. And there's very few things that make good broadheads stand apart.
Right.